Good evening, everyone. I'm Carrie Fox. I'm the Deputy Director of Marketing and Earned Revenue at the New Children's Museum. And I want to welcome all of you to tonight's show. For those of you that joined us for our first talk with Katie Ruiz, welcome back. And for those of you that are here tonight for the first time, thank you for coming. We're really excited to have David Reynoso here, and he'll be talking with Megan Dickerson. We love this series. We started it because it gives us an opportunity to talk about what we do that is unique to our museum, and we stand out from all children's museums, which is our work with contemporary art. So that's why we love these. And we've started this series virtually. And for the next couple, they probably will continue to be virtually, but as you could see in the slides, we will be opening soon. So hopefully we'll be able to do these in person with you at some point in the not too distant future. We do have everyone muted, but we do want to hear from you. So please feel free to put comments in the chat or in the Q&A section. We will be monitoring those throughout the evening and sharing them with Megan, our moderator. And at the end, at about 6:45, we're going to open it up for everyone to ask questions, and we'll make you visible if you'd like to be visible, and you can ask David questions directly. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Megan Dickerson, who is our Director of Exhibitions, and she will be moderating tonight. So Megan, come on.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So as Carrie said, I am the Director of Exhibitions here at the New Children's Museum. And over the past 7 years, we've made some significant changes to how we work with artists. Most notably, we've introduced an artist in residence program. In this program, the artist in residence works with communities to think about their project in a very integrated way. So they use play in community settings as a means of doing research for the immersive arts installation that they will create for our museum. I am proud to say that our 2021 artist in residence is David Israel Reynoso. David is an interdisciplinary artist who has spent much of his career, much of his professional life in the theater. He is the Obie Award winning costume designer for Sleep No More, an immersive theater experience that has been shown in Boston, New York City, and Shanghai. He's also an accomplished exhibit designer, and he created the gorgeous Living with Animals environment at the Museum of Man. David and I today are going to discuss the intersection of theater and children's museums as we begin to think about a new project called Teatro Piñata, working title, that will open at our museum in late 2021. So with that, David, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me. Yeah. Hi, Megan.
Hi. What's so lovely about these chats is it's an opportunity to bring others into the conversations that we have behind the scenes all the time. And actually, I'm realizing that's sort of a pun, behind the scenes, because that's a lot of what we're going to talk about.
True.
But one of the things that's interesting about our museum, because it's a children's museum and a contemporary art museum, and we really start with the playing child, not just the playing child that is coming to our museum, but also the playing child within all of us. So I'm going to ask you the question that I've already asked you, but for our those who have joined us today, to think about a place where you, David, as a child, enjoyed spending time. So what was that space? What was happening in that space? Can you take us there?
Yes. So I was born and raised in Guadalajara in Mexico, and I didn't really have like a front yard in our house. It was sort of like a row of houses that were like wall to wall, sort of down the street. But there was like a little patch of grass in front of each one of the houses, and there was a tree that was growing not in front of our house, but the neighbor's house. They had the better tree, and it was a tree you could climb, and the bark was, really smooth. It didn't really have anything that was kind of gonna, hurt you or anything like that. And something about the way the branches grew also made it really easy to climb when I was a kid. And then once you were inside, the way that the branches kind of all grew out, it was very easy to sort of park things within the tree. So I'd sort of put like a little house here, but then it would be that then suddenly you would drive your car down this branch and up that one and then get to this other location. And there was something about being inside of that tree and moving around within something that, wasn't a city, but this imagining that it could be, was one of my favorite places. And I actually don't know if I played it in it that many times, but something about the few times that I did, right, left that impression. Yeah.
I'm sure there are a lot of people right now imagining those trees. I'm imagining my tree was an orange tree, and I remember the smell of the citrus blossoms in it, you know, and I don't know, it might have been like what you're saying, that it was only a few times that I really played in that tree, but my memory, I could draw it. I could draw it.
Exactly.
You know, I remember it exactly. And what's beautiful is that a tree is not designed for children's play. That's not why a tree exists.
It exists, right?
Right.
But there's permission for it to happen. Yeah.
Yes. And it's acceptable to some extent for a child to spend time in a tree. And then all of these affordances in it, it is allowing you to, it can become a road, or it can become a neighborhood. It can become something that you can nestle in. It can give you some comfort, right? So that's, I love thinking about where we enjoyed spending time versus where we enjoyed playing, because often if you say play, people will go back to, well, I liked playing with toys, or I like, and you brought up toys, but the space, it's about the space.
But it was the activation of these things that were familiar in a sort of not familiar space, right? I think that's, I think that that's really wonderful about, utilizing something that, you know, isn't, you know, like I said, intended for that, but why not? I think that that was absolutely my favorite. And I see that, I have 2 kids myself, and I see the way that they do that, you know, sort of like, wait, that thing on the shelf was never meant to be that, but there it is. Today it's going to be a rocket. Fantastic. So I think that that is always surprising to me, just the things that our mind can activate with something that is meant to be either inanimate as we think of it, or be sort of decorative. So there's a lot of fun to be had in there.
And the permission, I mean, because that is a perfect transition to talking about Sleep No More, because I think that production is breaking a lot of rules.
Yes.
Or playing with those rules, pushing that. And so maybe you can give everyone a little bit of a sense of what that production is, because it comes up so often when we talk about your work.
It's really, I mean, the thing that's really interesting is, you know, much in the same way that, you know, we talk about kind of the you know, the New Children's Museum, and thinking of like, well, what are norms that we associate or assume about the way that someone is meant to behave or be in a museum? What are the permissions and that are available to sort of maybe think about something that's outside of what is traditionally presented? And Sleep No More is a form of theater that, when it premiered in the US, was very much seen as something that was pushing the boundaries of the definition of what theater was meant to be. You know, we all traditionally tend to think, you know, you go to see a play, you know, you go, you have your ticket, you go and sit down, and you know, the lights go down, everyone gets very quiet, you watch the show, regardless of whether or not you like it or not, you know, you applaud politely, and then you sort of like, you know, talk about it on your way home. And there's these kind of norms in terms of what you think going to see a show should be like. Whereas Sleep No More, what it did when it premiered in Boston, the first version of it in the US, was at an abandoned elementary school. And it's created by a company in London called Punch Drunk. And they are known for these kind of boundary pushing experiences. And so it was taking Shakespeare's Macbeth and presenting it through a wordless, you know, Shakespeare's words, suddenly stripped of that, but the story is there. And you, as an audience member, put on a mask, and then you're sort of set free to roam around a building. And you watch different kind of different scenes, or maybe arrive into a room that's empty, and you are meant to, you know, you have permission to touch things. You sometimes will come very close to a performer, watch them do their scene, and then suddenly you get to follow them as they go down a different corridor. And it was an elementary school. So here was this setting that felt, you know, sort of dreamlike. It's like it's a strange sort of dream, this kind of clash of like a school, and then having something where you'd open a classroom and suddenly you'd be in this 1930s, you know, hotel room. I have some pictures of this production, because in some ways explaining it feels so strange, but if you'd like, I can sort of show some of the things.
I would love if you showed some pictures. It's funny, it's like when we describe our museum, like, there's rooms that you go into and some of them are tiny and there's a giant net. We just need to show pictures. So I would love to see some pictures.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So this was the very first version of it in the US at this elementary school. As you can see, there's the hallways that are familiar, but then suddenly it would be outfitted with great detail. And the thing that was interesting is that you were actually sort of told that fortune favors the bold, this idea of kind of like go and explore. And instead of saying like, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, instead it was like, just go. And what's interesting is then suddenly a room would be activated by performers, and suddenly they might leave. And if you decide you don't want to sort of chase them down the hall, you could stay in that room and then, you know, go through the drawers, open things up, see what was inside and explore, and almost maybe come up with your own sort of story. There might be little secrets that are hidden inside of these spaces. And then that show then was premiered in New York, and we had a version that ran for nearly 10 years, sort of is in, you know, it sort of shut down due to the pandemic. But we also have a version that premiered in Shanghai in 2015, 16, I think is what I say, and it's still running. And it's just really been amazing to see how this form of theater, well, you know, felt very groundbreaking and sort of boundary pushing at the time, has resonated with audiences internationally. And it's been this form of storytelling that, while at first might have felt unfamiliar, you know, to many, it strangely unlocks some of that sense of play, that curiosity that we all have toward wanting to discover more things, you know, that are embedded in the space.
Well, you're bringing me back because I saw it in Boston, and I was working at Boston Children's Museum at the time, and I went to that old school, and I'm realizing I'm a very playful person, but I didn't open up any drawers. I didn't really know you could do that. And I saw other people, but I think that's what makes it so interesting, is that you're constantly trying to figure out, what is my role? You know, you've gone away from the I sit down and I clap. And so you have to think about it. You have to be much more of a player in the experience, right? It's all active theater, you know, versus passive theater. But there's just something to that it's so unique.
And I think much in the same way that we were talking about kind of like these being in the tree, and maybe I didn't go in that many times, but it just left. I can't not remember it. I think that can happen with experiences that maybe we don't reside in very long for, but they just leave that imprint in us. And something about activating kind of the muscle memory as you play, I think that's no accident that, you know, a play is what we use to describe the form of a theater, you know, so like what you go to see. I think there is something about that invitation to participate in the storytelling in some ways. I think that can happen when audience members are sitting passively. There's an invitation to sort of fill in the blanks, because, you know, not everything that's on stage is always, you know, outlined in the way that maybe a film might. So you are invited to, you know, fill in the blanks. In this case, in moving through the space, you're participating in a way that your senses are activated. You're smelling things, you're tasting things, you're touching things, you're, you know, listening to things, and there's just a lot more that's activated when you feel like you are the one kind of, you know, the protagonist, if you will, of the story in some ways.
Well, you know, so much of the play literature is about control, and feeling a sense of control over your own experience. And I think it's interesting thinking about, you know, kids. So there's research about there's greater instances of depression in children now as there's less access to play. But I also think about adults. We think that we have so many choices, but it's only when we're confronted with an experience like Sleep No More that we're really, okay, this is new. This is different. I don't really know how to behave here. I'm wearing a mask and I don't even know where the person I came with is right now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think that sometimes we rely on the safety of being told what to do. Like, how am I supposed to perform? Do I sit here? There's something when we are kind of left to kind of, you know, fill in or sort of figure it out on our own. that it unlocks that that play form that we knew so well as kids, but maybe sort of forgot about for a bit. And I think that there is something about being able to unlock that that feels essential toward, you know, I think to also not just sort of for our well-being, but I think the idea of being able to imagine any other possibility beyond our own only comes from, you know, and that can be like one where we imagine a better future for our world, comes for the same imagination from imagining that this is suddenly like its own spaceship, you know, like I think that it's something about
blasting off, right?
Yeah, like, totally. Yeah, this thing isn't exactly what it was, but why can't it be this? I think is really, really an interesting and beautiful way to think about, you know, living in this planet.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that I'm skipping around a little bit, but I'm thinking about how creative you were with Fortaleza, the project where, and I'll give some context, but it's, you know, how do you do theater at home when you can't physically be together? How do you create this experience that transports you beyond, right? Because what I do love, you know, I want to underscore that traditional theater already is making you work. You have to fill in the blanks.
You're involved.
Right? There's just a chair and a table on the stage, but you have to imagine the entirety of the rest of the set, right? So every person is seeing something different. But I think, you know, I guess maybe this is getting more into sort of the depth of your work, but what inspires you to play with the form so much, right? Because, and we'll go back into, you know, Fortaleza later.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I think, I mean, as a, you know, a lot of my work in theater began as a designer. I'm a sort of scenic and costume designer by trade, and then I've sort of moved into creating kind of these immersive experiences. I also have been working in exhibit design. I think in all those forms, I think that there's always, you know, I'm just a kind of a curious person, and I like to think about, well, what happens if? And I know that that's also what excites a lot of my colleagues in theater, this idea of, you know, I think in a way like a sound designer sort of might say like, what happens if we do this sonically? What will that make people feel? I think that kind of curiosity to tinker and sort of see what impact it might have. You know, in theater, I think I always describe my responsibility as a designer as being kind of a three-dimensional illustrator, much in the same way that like when you see a children's book, there's the text, but, you know, the image, you know, sometimes holds, you know, just as much weight or sometimes leaves more of an impact than what you're hearing or reading. But I think that they dance together. And I think that is what I hope, you know, I do when I'm designing for theater. As far as pushing the form, I don't know. I think what it is that it, when I remember when I was working on Sleep No More as a costume designer with Punch Drunk, I thought, I mean, you know, it was all theory what it is that this was all going to be, and it wasn't until the moment that then I went and put on my own white mask and we tried it out as and I was an audience member, that it suddenly clicked. I thought, oh, I get this, and what it was is this idea that it unlocked that feeling of being a child, even though this, you know, it's not a play for children per se, but it unlocked that sense of wonder of like kind of like what is this world that I didn't know, that, you know, what's through this door, you know. And I think that and the way that we, you know, children sometimes are living in wide-eyed wonder of just how the world operates, I think that is what that felt like. And so I think I really love the possibility of how story told in maybe a surprising way can maybe tap into our sort of our hearts or a psyche in a very powerful and meaningful and maybe life-changing way. So as far as like my work and in terms of Fortaleza, when I kind of started thinking about what kind of work I wanted to create, not just sort of design for, I received a Creative Catalyst grant from the San Diego Foundation, and I was inspired to create a piece about a Mexican myth that I grew up hearing, the story of La Llorona, which is about a woman who is thought to be kind of a monster. And so, but I really wanted to maybe think about, was there a way maybe asking people to see that story through a new lens.
Mhm.
And I'll show some images of that,
Yeah. Okay.
that experience. It was all about, I was trying to think about what is the form of, how I want people to maybe experience this show, and what the framework of it would be. And I got inspired by this image that I saw that inspired my company, which is called Óptica Moderna. And this image that I saw was by Manuel Alvarez Bravo, which is a Mexican photographer in the 1930s. And this image of this optician's office in the 1930s that he purposely printed in reverse. And there's something kind of offsetting, kind of strange about it, mysterious. And I thought, well, that seems like a place in which there might be something odd at work, and that maybe you arrive and that someone might challenge your vision. As you can see, it was named Óptica Moderna as well. And I saw this image at MOPA actually, a few years ago, and it was really amazing to then see it, presented there. We love them. So the play was called Waking La Llorona, and you began at this strange optician's office. You had an appointment, one person at a time would arrive. You saw this odd, doctor, and they assessed you and sort of determined that maybe you might not be able to see things as you should. And so then they outfit you with this kind of, optical gears is what I want to say. And what it was that it, it felt like you were putting on like a VR headset. And certainly when we think about, virtual reality, we think, oh, I'm going to put this on. And the idea is that I immediately am transported to a new world where I just, I believe that I'm somewhere else, even though I haven't really left where I'm at. And I like that idea that, as soon as you put on the headset and you listen to the soundtrack and you're watching through something here, you give yourself permission to sort of go somewhere else. So I wanted to do that, but then suddenly open the window and suddenly what you're seeing is reality, but now it's a virtual reality, and the fact that it's kind of heightened. And everything that you see is through this kind of very much through a lens, almost like looking through, like a cinematographer looking through a camera. And you move through a space and encounter different performers. It was all timed to music, and you saw the story of La Llorona kind of unfold before your eyes in a kind of a non-linear and maybe surprising way. And it was done at Bread and Salt. And a lot of the way that so the space was created was through cardboard and tissue paper, but you had no sense of that in the way that then it was built. And then I had an opportunity to a commission by La Jolla Playhouse to create a piece that was inspired by quinceañeras. And I certainly, they always say, write what you know. And I thought, well, as a cisgender male, I never was a quinceañera, but I remember, them as a kid. And so I wondered, well, is there something about the specificity of that event that maybe perhaps we can all relate to? That there's, well, very culturally specific, perhaps there's something about that moment of transition of, leaving behind a moment or a season of time before we go into the next one. And that in-between space is something that I think we can all relate to and know very well. And so it's something that then we can all sort of, can really see and relate to. Oh, and by the way, I have a little cameo here from my son who's coming to say hi.
Hi.
You want some water? Yeah. Do you remember where Ari can get you some water?
Oh.
Remember, she's got the cups. Remember, she got you the cup in the step stool. It's always one of those things where it's hilarious. It's like, but you're welcome to. You can hear you if you want to. No, he just wanted to say hi. Anyway, but yeah, this idea of kind of that liminal transition space that we all know. So yeah, getting to Fortaleza, how do we then create something like that then is at home, but how do we lose ourselves in something where our senses are heightened? So, and it was, how do we challenge our assumptions? So I created this piece that was inspired by everything from like old board games to this, like a kinetoscope that which you look through and, flipped this, turn this crank and you saw almost like a flip book. It was one of the first early moving pictures. And so, and I love paper theaters and, kind of this imagery of like messenger angels. So it was this thing where you received this odd package in the mail and you put something together, much like, I don't know, I loved when like you had to take a cereal box and assemble it into something else. It was meant to feel that way. This idea of something humble that then had magic in it. So then when you looked through it and then observed something on your telephone, it felt like it expanded beyond the horizon of just the screen that we are all very familiar with. So yeah, that's a bit of the work of Optica Moderna so far. And it's been interesting to see, where that journey has taken me, and I'm excited by what's to come. So yeah.
Well, it makes me think about what you said before. You might not have been into that tree many times, but it left this impact on you. And it makes me think about experiences that people have mentioned to me at the New Children's Museum. Oh, I came there as a kid and I always remembered this one thing. And I think what's so beautiful about these experiences that you're creating is that I can tell you personally, they had this major impact on me. Long before I knew you, I went to Sleep No More, and it made me start to think about children's museums differently. I was working at Boston Children's Museum at the time, and I started to look at everything as theater. Right?
Wow.
And sets, and children's museums often are sets, so that there's the traditional, what's become traditional for children's museums is there's the pretend grocery store and there's the cityscape, but if you kind of turn it to 11, right, you get to where we're at with the New Children's Museum, where it's just these strange environments. And Fortaleza is the other thing, because I did this, I did it at home, and I don't want to spoil any secrets about it, but it does ask you to reflect. It invites you to reflect on people that you miss. And for me, I was thinking about one very particular person, who's been gone from my life for 30 years. And I did feel like it with those specific objects, I don't know what you call it, but the kaleidoscope thing, that you put onto your phone. And I also did it at night, and I turned off the lights and I had some candles, and it was just, I was preparing myself for a different kind of experience. And I don't think I've ever even told you all this, but it really, I felt that connection to that person that I missed. And
wow.
So I thank you for that, and I know that I'm not the only person who had, of all the people who did Fortaleza, I'm sure there are other people who had that experience as well. And it just, again, it reminds me of the importance of singular experiences, right?
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Wow. It is interesting how, I think something about, I love that you had that moment in which you were able to remember, that person. And I think, I think the fact that when we are able to kind of have moments in which something is unlocked, but then something gives us permission to feel, and it can be a great variety of feelings, right? But sometimes we do tend to think of wanting to almost put boundaries or set up walls to sort of, that be like, oh, I don't know if I want to go there. But I think in some ways, when we allow ourselves to be moved, either through, both, physically moving through a space, but I think moved by a piece of art, or I think that it's because we've invested something, that we've allowed ourselves to get in, to become engaged with it, even though we know, or, I think in an intellectual way that maybe we're not really truly, I don't know, participants, but yet we are. But I think that that emotional investment allows for that experience, either cathartic or wondrous, inspiring. Any myriad of emotions can come from that. And I'm delighted to hear that you had that with Fortaleza.
Yeah. Well, it's what keeps me going in this work, and it's why I do this work in children's museums and with artists, because you can have that impact. And it's especially after the year that the world has had, and everything from COVID to the global calls for racial justice. We have a lot of healing and processing to do. And so I think that your project, coupled with Panka's El Masaya project, and they're going to be next to each other, on the lower level. I think that I'm so full of hope and optimism and joy for what that's going to do for our community, right? I mean,
that's lovely.
It feels like soul work, right? So maybe that's a good transition to talking about Teatro Piñata and what we've been talking about for the Children's Museum.
Oh, I'd love to talk about it. It was, I was delighted when, when you approached me about applying to be artist in residence. And then I think when I was honored with that, I thought, well, how am I gonna, what am I gonna do? I've done, work both for the Museum of Us and in theater. And I've always loved the New Children's Museum in terms of all the space, and I've seen how my children interact with that space, but also how I interact with that space. It does something to me. And I thought, well, okay, well, this is cool. Like, what would I want to go to? Certainly what, I've been sort of checking in with my kids and asking them, like, what if there was this? How would you feel about that? But then also just thinking kind of like, what would like kid David be excited to go see? And so Teatro Piñata came as an idea because I really love piñatas. And of course I love theater. And I think what's really cool about piñatas, I think that there's it's what's inside that's quite exciting, and then I also love, I think the art of the piñata is so fantastic, and the possibilities of what it could mean. So I'll share a little bit of kind of some imagery that's inspired kind of the project, if you'd like. So thinking that what the proposal is sort of going to be is that we think that maybe there's like this mysterious pop-up caravan theater that has arrived at the New Children's Museum, but behind its curtains, nothing is quite what it seems. And so then we sort of come to this, maybe sort of odd caravan theater, and that maybe once you go up on stage and go through the curtains and sort of go backstage, what's backstage is actually way more interesting and magical than when you might be on stage. I think we all think about, I myself also get stage fright. I know what that's like in terms of getting up on stage and how that does require some bravery. But I think I like the idea of, that you kind of get that part out of the way. You've already done that as you start this. You've already done this thing that sort of required a little bit of courage before you then dive into exploring the rest of the space. And so a lot of the visuals that are, that are inspiring me are everything from kind of, paper theaters, like I mentioned. I love, the idea of using paper mache and ribbons, and I love carnivals and, collage work, and thinking of kind of how to embed things that maybe are surprising, but then also familiar about theater. So you might think about the backdrops and the costumes and the lights, and what happens when you change the spotlight in this direction, and what is it like to walk into a room full of costumes, but then maybe that perhaps that is presented in a way that feels sort of surprising or maybe dreamlike or surreal. I quite love that. And I think that there's something about then in the way that when you kind of walk into, for those of you who've ever been into like an old props storage or maybe the backstage of a theater, and you might see the old, backdrops for things, it kind of awakens that sense of like, well, I don't know, I kind of want to go there, or what happens if something like that, what if I did this with that? And I think that's what I really want the space to feel like, that it's this place in which you are meant to be inspired to activate something that you might think about, well, all right, well, that looks like a space. I know it's not clouds, but it looks like clouds. And what if we then now play with this? And what if there's this? I think something about that sense of wonder that can happen in the backstage, the
Mhm.
invitation that, there's possibility to be had with the world that you create on that small stage.
Mhm.
That is what I hope to really kind of capture,
Mhm.
and that it's meant to be a place that feels um, full of exploration for kids. Yeah, well, and for everyone, honestly, I hope that, whatever your age, that you would be also kind of delighted by what you're seeing and inspired.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, so thinking about the collaborative nature of theater,
Mm, very true.
and there's so many roles in theater beyond just the person who is on stage.
Yeah.
And I think it's so beautiful that you're thinking about, you've already gone through that, of
Mm,
stepping out onto the stage, and you realize that there's so much more, right? Because
mm,
to me, it's, you know, play is what more might be done. What more,
yeah.
like, again, this could be so many different things, right?
Mm,
And having that permission to be able to do it.
yeah.
Um, and I think I like that it's a challenge for you because you're doing something that you've never done before. You've never done this specifically in this
Yeah.
way, in this moment. You've got your consultants in the house who you can ask about,
It's
as you
true.
go along.
Hmm.
But it really feels like an adventure, right?
I think, we all can remember probably times in our lives in which we had things that maybe made us a little bit nervous at first, maybe a little bit scared even, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then maybe it took some kind of, all right, I'm gonna do it. And then you do it, and then you feel so excited and so proud of yourself that you did this. And I think what I hope happens is at maybe that the sort of opening threshold of the space as you enter into it, that it maybe does cause a little bit of questioning in terms of like, what am I about to embark on? And then once you make the choice to do so, that suddenly it's like you can take on the world. There's just suddenly like everything is just so full of fun. And at this point, you did the hard part. Now it's time for you to just go um, and play. Truly, in the best and fullest way to imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Oh, I mean, that's a beautiful thesis statement for it,
Yeah.
and the idea that after you, I don't know, maybe it's trying to say that we can do hard things.
Mhm.
It's
It's that.
difficult. It's challenging to go
It's that.
down a giant slide for the first time.
Yeah.
You're not sure how fast you're going to go. You don't know
Yeah.
whether you're going to shoot out at the bottom. And afterwards, you do feel like you can do anything. But I think that's happening on so many levels at our museum. Everything from, oh, I can make something out of clay, right? I didn't think of myself as someone who could do that, but now
We
I
could
can
do
do
that.
that, right?
Hmm.
But I think that there's something about, we talked about this project with others. Everybody brings up stories of, oh, I was so nervous, right? I remember
Uh-huh.
I was in a school play in third grade and I'll never do that again. Or I have, the stage fright. And I just think it's a really beautiful way, the way that you're setting it up, that you have to pass through that stage first to get into, you have to pass through that trial to get to the good stuff, is a way of
Yeah.
thinking about life, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's our tendency to be protective of
Mhm,
risk. I mean, as a parent, I confess I do the same
mhm,
with my children in terms of thinking of like, oh, I don't know. And yet I
mhm,
think it's in those moments in which I sort of allow them to take the risk, and including it's a risk for me to watch them take the risk. I think that there is something beneficial about, seeing that they have, sort of empowering them to sort of see that they have that capacity in them to take on a risk. I have the capacity to watch them take on that risk. And then I also think about the moments and things in my life that I find to be kind of the most rewarding,
mhm,
or experiences of things that I was part of, were things that likely stretched me or felt
mhm,
like I was stepping out of my wheelhouse.
mhm,
It felt unfamiliar.
mhm,
I have a friend of mine who always said, uh, always say yes to a new country. And when she was told that, is this idea of kind of, anytime you have an opportunity to travel somewhere that you do not know, say yes. And I think that can also be true for an experience that maybe we haven't had yet, that there's an opportunity and wow, you maybe have never had an opportunity to do that before. Maybe lead with yes before you start immediately saying no. And I think my trajectory in theater has been a lot about that. I did not study costume design. I sort of fell into it and tried it out. And then turned out a greater portion of my work in theater has turned out to be costume design. I'd never designed an exhibit, and then I had an opportunity to do that. There's been things, a lot of the great things that I've been very proud to be part of were things in which I had that little voice inside that said, no, I don't know if you can do that. And there was a matter of sort of saying, no, I want to try it. And I think that bravery is something we all want and know how to tap into.
So what's made that possible for you to be able to say yes and listen to that voice?
I mean, I think it's been one of those things where it's incremental. It's likely that even as I was much younger, I maybe took smaller risks and thought, I was able to do that. I survived that. Not only survived that, but it actually might be great. And I think that it makes you want to maybe take on something. Oh, well, how can I challenge myself further? I mean, I also am very blessed to have parents who gave me permission to do that. And I think I've been surrounded by people in my life who likely nurture that sense of maybe risk taking. I mean, not to say that it's without a lot of kind of consideration. I'm not, you don't sort of fly wherever you want to, but I think that there is something about allowing yourself to imagine that an outcome could be good instead of immediately assuming that it's just going to be disastrous. And I mean, not everything that I've tried out has been a success. Let's be honest about that. And I think the thing that's also important to know is that you can hold those with equal weight. The successes and the failures hold sort of the same place. And if I can maybe imagine that they both are going to be equally beneficial to me, that's a much more freeing way to think about trying out things in art. And
that's beautiful. Well, there's actually a question in the chat that's thinking about children who might not be familiar with a traditional stage space. Do we have any plans to incorporate an informal scripted performative aspect to the play space, with costumed interpreters or facilitators to encourage imaginative play? And it's an interesting question because you're trying to find that balance of what's the play cue that gets you into it, right?
Yeah.
How would you answer that question?
So I hope that this, the space that's created has permission to be that if it wants to be that, or if suddenly like there wants to be some event or something that wants to take place, or something that is very impromptu. These two children decided that this is what's going to happen right now, that they could. But I also think that there's something about what happens when the lore, the invitation to this space is occurring before you even arrive at the New Children's Museum. Is there something about that? It's kind of like when we all know, like when sometimes you will go, be excited to go to a restaurant, and maybe you've already looked up the menu, and you might show up and be like, oh, I should look at the menu anyway. But there's something about or perhaps there's a movie you're really excited to see, or something that you're really wanting. There's something about that anticipation that's useful and it's part of the whole experience. So I've been considering, are there things that can happen that perhaps maybe give prompts or give considerations for what this space could be? Not that what it should be, but what it could be. I think that then it might then act as a springboard for it to become something even beyond what I intended it for it to be. And that's my sort of hope and dream for this, is that I and sort of maybe thinking of the ideas of the infrastructure in terms of how I assume it will be activated. But I look forward to coming and seeing, it activated in ways that are just beyond my sort of assumptions. And
Right.
I think that
Being
that's going to be
surprised.
delightful. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's one of the beautiful things of working at this museum. You're always surprised.
Mhm.
And with that, actually, we want to open it up to questions from the group. So I think that if you're going to have the option of showing your camera if you'd like to, or you can stay off camera. Hi, Carrie. Welcome back. Oh, Carrie, I think you're still muted.
I am. Yeah, so what we can do with all of you is we can give you the ability to talk. And if you also, I'm just going to slowly go through. And then if you would like also to be visible, then we can do that as well. So let's see. I'm slowly going through and opening that up for you. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I know I had one to get us started while I'm clicking all of these little buttons. David, when we were talking yesterday, you talked about when you were a kid and how much fun you had with the simplest of items. So can you talk a little bit about your creativity as a child?
Yes, a question that came up for me yesterday was, was there something that you really loved to play with? And I said that one thing that was my favorite thing was a roll of masking tape, which I know sounds so strange, but there was something about what the tape could be, what I could do with it, what I suddenly, I could use it for, beyond what it really probably was intended for, was way more fun. And so my parents were always like, "Where's the masking tape?" And of course, they always then finally learned that probably David had hoarded it and was doing something with it. And I think that there is something about that I don't know. I think that it felt like it was just full of possibility. The irony is that my kids love masking tape now, and I hilariously am now on the role of the parent of being like, "Where's the masking tape?" And so it's just, life is a funny way of.
Well, masking tape is the perfect plaything because it has so many interesting properties, right? You can make marks with it, you can ball it up, you can make it into ball that you can play with, you can put things together. I mean, it's kind of the ultimate toy.
I think too, the fact that it probably wasn't going to hurt like paint finishes, it felt like there was like permission, like as opposed to like other tape that was, I think, a bit more dangerous.
Yes, exactly. Like duct tape, no, keep that locked up.
Packing tape, no. Yeah.
There was another question that someone sent to me about, because your child popped in. So talk a little bit about your kids and maybe either their experience at our museum or even with theater. And do they know what you do? And what do they think you do? What does Daddy do for a living?
That is, that would be a whole fascinating panel to be on, is watching my children being like, "What do you think your dad does?" No, yes, I've got two children, a 3.5-year-old and a 6.5-year-old. And, they're amazing. They're amazing kids. The thing that's really fascinating and fortunate about them is that they actually really get along really well, which is, I know, and I think I've been delighted to see. Yes, they have history at the New Children's Museum, and I have pictures and memories of them going, and I can't wait to bring them back. I think the thing that's going to be really today, I was talking to them about going on this panel, or this talk, and then thinking about what I was going to be doing, and then they said, "Well, can we go to your thing when it's done?" And I said, "Yeah, I would want you to." And they were like, "Okay." I think because a lot of the things that I probably do theater-wise, it's they don't get to go. I mean, they maybe get to see parts of it, or this is all very kind of abstract. I did have this moment where I had earlier in the pandemic, I was part of designing sets and costumes for a ballet in Helsinki, Finland. And I did not travel to Finland, but they continued to, they premiered it anyway. And here I was on Zoom at 11 o'clock in the morning. It was, nighttime there. And it was really cool to have my daughter here on my lap watching the premiere with me. And I think she suddenly was like, you did that. So I think it's little by little the puzzle pieces start to go together. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat about I remember a box in the lower level of NCM many years ago that was filled with materials allowing for unstructured play. I loved it. Will we see something like this in Teatro Piñata? So it's referencing Cardboard Chaos, which was a space in Studio Q where you'll be installing Teatro Piñata, which I think you may have seen. I'm not sure, but it was our pop-up adventure playground, and it was just full of stuff, and it had curtains, and we talked about that a little bit, but I think that's that behind the scenes. Once you go past that curtain, then you're in this wonderland of unstructured play, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think that my hope is that there's different facets of, that there's things that can feel, if someone decides they want to structure it, or that's meant that they could, but that there are opportunities for there to be things that do with it what you wish. And I think that that'll be really fun to see. And I think that's what I think we hope to kind of to try out and see what's useful, what is too much stuff, what's not enough. I think there's a balance of that, right? And I think it'd also be interesting to see just some of that stuff maybe change every week into something, I don't know, could be there's some fun opportunities there, I think.
Right. Well, when we developed the Wonder Sound with Wes Bruce, a critical part of it was thinking about the staff role. And it's, not the staff who are kind of saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, but the staff who are available to adults who might have questions. So those of you who are listening who are familiar with the Wonder Sound, it's not always easy to find your child. And that's partly intentional, because then they have their own space and they can be in their own environment. And so it is interesting to think about the performative aspects of a staff member, and how do they engage in a way that sets you on the journey, right? Without giving you all the answers.
Yes, exactly. That's it. I think it's a matter of, or almost saying to you, it's okay that you don't know exactly what you're getting into. That's right. Okay. This is a place for you to try things. I think that sometimes we even just need that permission to say, it's all right that no, you didn't miss anything. You are meant to kind of not know much as you go into this. I think that can be really useful as well. Yeah.
Does anyone else have questions they want to answer? You can ask the question either in the Q&A box, or you can come on camera, or just use audio to ask your question.
I was just seeing Reed there, and I was reminded of read an article at the New York Times, which was really fascinating, about kind of how the pandemic has really hurt piñata makers in terms of the art form of it. And I think that a desire of mine, I think, with this project too, is the idea of celebrating the art form. And it's made us consider, as we think about how to make this possible, whether or not there's opportunities to maybe partner with local piñata makers. Are there maybe piñata makers across the border that maybe we can partner with, in terms of saying, you may have never made a piñata like this, but what happens if you try? I think that there's something about that can feel really exciting, and this idea of, honoring the fact that it is an art form. I think, beyond the fact that it's also an event, it's also an art form. And I think that my hope is that people walk away also thinking about, what a piñata might mean. Seems like a really
and an ancient and honored art form. Honestly, in Mexico, it's an honored art form.
Yes.
So we have someone with a question. In the corner, you have your hand up, and you put something in the Q&A. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you. My name is Tony, and I'm really loving this event. David, briefly, I'm an interdisciplinary artist also. And when I was the arts director at the local Veterans Museum in Balboa Park, I implemented an artist in residence program and facilitated a couple of theater fests, which involved putting together a theater group and playwriting and the whole bundle of activities. primarily for veterans, military, and their families, and the public also. So it was quite successful. And I'm intrigued by your style, I'll call it, of integrating your different disciplines into this, let's call it active theater. I think in the description it says, audience moves freely through a darkly cinematic lens wearing masks. So I have a couple of questions. How did you arrive at that concept? What triggered you?
So the concept of kind of the idea of, putting on a mask and moving through a space was, I confess I was not the one who created that idea. It was the company I was working with. It's this company called Punch Drunk that are in London. And so, but through my working with them, what it did, it unlocked the possibility of how story could be told through maybe theater that is sort of less traditional. And so when I thought about the work that I wanted to create, I certainly, looked toward my experience with Punch Drunk and sort of thought, well, what would it mean to have something that was as impactful as what that experience can be for someone, but also celebrates, Mexico in a very kind of unapologetic way. And instead of it, I think I really wanted it to be something that felt like you got a chance to enter in a dreamlike state that felt beautiful and magical and yeah, a bit full of wonder, much in the way that one might have experience in going through Sleep No More. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And now that you've had these multiple experiences, I've jotted down all the play titles and I'll look them up later. Is there anything you haven't tried yet that you want to further develop the idea?
I think, it's, it's strangely getting to work in the New Children's Museum was on that list of things that I thought, oh, would be really wonderful to get to create something. I mean, because I remember the first time I saw the Wonder Sound, well, I should say experienced the Wonder Sound, not saw it. It felt like, oh, wow, this would be awesome to get to make something like this. And I think even though that, the Wonder Sound is not exactly kind of like what Punch Drunk is. There's, I think, a crossover in the fact that it's texturally very rich. Your senses are activated. There's spaces that are meant to sort of be unveiled. I think that's my hope that Teatro Piñata is able to maybe harness some of that same magic.
I really admire and appreciate and like and love what all of you doing, the staff at the museum and you can count on me to be an audience member at, what's the name of it? Teatro Piñata.
That's right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your great questions and comments. It's 7:01, but if anyone has questions, any additional questions or comments, we can probably take a couple more. And if not, I will plug the next couple artist talks. So maybe while you're thinking of those questions, May 12th, we have Wes and Bruce with the Wonder Sound, which David mentioned. And if any of you haven't seen it, you're going to want to come see it. Risa Puno is on June 16th. We are reopening on May 7th to members and on May 21st to the public. So we are extremely excited after being closed. It will have been almost 14 months. Reservations are required. Just please look at our website. We hope everyone comes back and visits. We're super excited. Well, I guess I don't see any more hands or anything in the chat or the Q&A. We will, this was recorded, so it'll be available to watch. We do have information on our website about upcoming events. So with that, I mean, David, thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and Megan for moderating, and all of you for coming and staying through this and for the Q&A.
So.
Pleasure. Thank you for
Good
having
night.
me. Thanks everyone for being here. You can find me on Instagram. It's at Design Reynoso. That's a great way to reach me.